My name is James Urquhart. I am on the field CTO team at Pivotal. What we do is work very closely with senior technical leaders and executives on understanding how to deliver Pivotal in a strategic way, and work with them on a bunch of different technical strategy areas, including cloud strategy and application platform strategy. So this is a presentation that I gave originally at Cloud Foundry Summit Europe, but I extended. So I've added some stuff relative to, let me make sure I got the right one here. Added some stuff relative to the ways that, yeah, good, all right. To explain beyond what sort of the original presentation was. So we'll go ahead and present again. All right. Title of the presentation is Path Reduction as a Service, but I'm going to start with an allegory, an imperfect allegory, as all allegories tend to be. It's called Bridges, Ramps, and Roads. And starts with once upon a time in a world that's not our own. There was a village. And this village had actually built a pretty good industry around its core competency, which was agriculture. So they had a number of capabilities they were able to deliver, including packaging, the food products that were created, even marketing. And this village had to deliver these products to market. And unfortunately, the market was quite a ways away. And along the way between the village and the market, there were great, big, deep, cavernous ravines that were very difficult to get across. And there were giant, almost insurmountable cliffs that had to be climbed over in order to get there. And then, in addition to all of that, the worst of all, the bureaucrats. Fearsome, awe-inspiring people that try to enforce the rules and the decisions of the weak, like these guys. Don't they just instill fear in your heart? Now, in the early days, the way that the village sought to deal with this was to basically have each producer figure out their own route to get to market. And so it started out in interesting ways. So, first each of the producers got to the ravine and had to cross this deep and difficult ravine. And so some decided, what we'll do is we'll build big sturdy wagons with powerful teams of horses and great shock absorbers built into them. And we'll find the shallowest part of the ravine we could possibly cross, and we'll just kind of force our way through. And some decided to use different forms of powerful teams. And this is an example of an engineer here with her team of yaks, which are incredible for getting across the ravine. But of course, when the weather changed, they required a lot of shaving. Other teams said, the heck with it. We're just going to take our product and we're just going to throw it across the ravine as far as we can. And so they took great trebuchets and they took their products and they just put them in the right kind of containers they thought, and they threw them across, which worked great. Well, it worked a lot. Okay, actually, it only worked some of the time. But when it did, it was way better than wagons. And one very smart team took their time to think about it, said, hey, what if we took ropes and boards and we ran a pathway across the ravine. And they built a bridge. And it was great because once it was built, if they just did a little bit of maintenance on it, they didn't have to build it again. And it worked every single time. So each of the teams did their thing, and they went across the ravine, and they came up next to the cliff. And again, they had the challenge of how do we cross these cliffs? And, the teams that were, hey, the heck with it, I want to do it the easiest way possible, said, what if we just fling our stuff up there? And they built varying sizes of slingshots, and they threw their stuff up there. And again, it worked okay if you had the right kind of sturdy product and you could kind of get it, but, as long as there was no wind. And, the cliff, you found a low enough point in the cliff to do it. The smarter teams, some of the smarter teams here said, you know what? We're going to use ropes and pulleys to do this. And so they built these great systems of ropes and pulleys. And, they were great. They worked really well, but they were kind of specialized. They worked, for different products in different ways. You need different numbers of pulleys and sizes of ropes for different weights of product. And so you ended up with these things that became very custom by the team and the product that was doing things. And that led to having engineers that had to really know how to put all the ropes and the pulleys together and how to deal with it. And these engineers tended to become very critical to the ability to get across the cliffs, and they become very revered. And you can actually see one of them on the left there in the picture. And one team, a different team, but one team took the time and looked and said, you know what? If we just spend a little bit of time here and carve a ramp up the side of the cliff and put a little bit of safeguards in just to make sure, that nothing falls accidentally off the edge, it's probably going to be a lot easier for us. And they built the ramp. And once it was built and maybe tweaked a couple times, it was there. And it took effort to get things up the ramp over the cliff, but it worked the same every time. They could build a repeatable process from this. So everybody did their thing to get across the cliffs, and then they came to the bureaucrats. And here's the thing about the bureaucrats. They weren't a separate thing to kind of be dealt with by each team. They ended up being this huge bottleneck, as you can see here, in the whole process. And there were lines and lines and lines of product waiting to get through and be inspected one by one by each of the teams that took a look at things. So one team was able to sit back and say, with our product, if we were able to bundle it all in a consistent way, put it together in a way that we could say is repeated and provide a manifest that proves that we've kind of put all this together, and maybe give a little bit of ability to kind of visually inspect here and there one or two things just to verify that it is what we said it was. We think we can show with a data-based approach that we actually have a better solution to being able to verify that we're meeting the objectives of the bureaucrats. And so they were able to present this to the bureaucrats, and they were able to actually then come up with a system where they would stop briefly to have some basic verification of what needed to do. But because it was so much easier for the bureaucrats, they could actually bypass those long lines that had to go through the deep inspection. And they came up with a separate way, and they were able to get their stuff through the bureaucratic process faster and with less effort. Now, so as this started to happen, each of the product teams, they're not dumb. They're looking around, they're seeing what's working better than other things. And so some of the other teams began to adapt the same bridge system that the bridge team did. And they began to adapt the same ramp systems that the ramp teams did. And even more so, they began to try to figure out ways to package and negotiate with the bureaucrat teams to maybe bypass stuff. But in that particular case, it helped, but it didn't really eliminate the problem. It just took some of the effort out. Now, one particular village elder, well, actually, in this case, village hipster.
James, is that your
I looked at it and I said, it just reminds me of somebody, but I don't know. I don't see Tony here, so I can't verify it. He said, what if we kind of began to help the product teams with using the best practices that are out there? What if we were actually able to help, work with organizations to help make sure that we optimize as much as we could getting product to market? And so they created what they called the platform team. Get it? All right. And the platform team not only was able to kind of initially build consistent bridge plans, but they were able to actually start to build out teams that would help go with the teams to build the bridges and build bridges in consistent ways and learn from mistakes made in bridging. So better materials, better safety and security concerns on the bridges and so on. And they were able to do the same thing with the ramps. They would go help the development teams with the ramps and help work through those things. And they also worked with the bureaucrats to kind of get the last of the teams through the humps and avoid the long lines and so on. But there were still some issues there, but they made life better for the organizations. And with this, I'm going to stop for a second and say, is this the role of a platform team, to deliver technologies to development organizations? Is Cloud Foundry, is Pivotal Cloud Foundry or open source Cloud Foundry, is that the reason? Is Spring the reason that your platform team exists? And the problem that I see with believing that, that you're focused around these technology pieces is pretty straightforward. In this picture, each of the engineering teams are still responsible for figuring out their own way to get to market. You haven't eliminated the toil that those teams have in getting their stuff to market. So the platform team in our little village, they finally figure out, what, if we build a highly redundant bridge system that everybody can use, and if we build this incredibly good ramp environment that allows for multiple types of traffic and multiple types of workloads, and it handles weight, and it handles speed, and if we work with the bureaucratic teams and help to build a really good, consistent way, maybe even apply some technology, some automation to the ways that we understand how product is getting verified, and help them understand the hassle of sort of changing rules at whim, and help to come up with some standards for what the rules are. We can make their life a lot easier. And in fact, in their case, when they implemented that, the bureaucrats said, what's really good here is, once you guys get your stuff through the system, there's multiple markets here that things could be deployed to. And we can help you figure out how to do a distribution on the other side of the bureaucratic process. So we can help you actually then figure out, once you have a verified set of product, how can we deliver it to where it's going to be most valuable at the right moment. And with this, the village production teams were happy. Well, that is, until one of the other villages discovered how to do cargo drones. All right. So really the purpose of that allegory is to get to a critical point that I like to make with my customers now about what is the purpose of a platform team? Why do platform teams exist? And the map that I draw when I do like an EBC or do an executive presentation, this is all kind of slapped up there all at once. But I build this story that shows you that, infrastructure and operations teams, the run side of the house, if you want to use VMware terminology, or if you want to use Chad Sedgwick, our VP of Sales, likes to use this analogy, right? The run side of the picture, their purpose, what they deliver, is capacity. And these days, Kubernetes engine for delivering compute and storage and network capacity to the developers ultimately. But delivering capacity isn't enough. If you leave developers to figure out how to then manipulate and use that capacity, there's a tremendous amount of work and toil there. And you ask anybody about the YAML that's required to do a secure, successful production Kubernetes deployment where you can find one, and they're going to tell you that is way more work than what we want to do. So what developers actually want is they want that CF push experience, but they want it across the entire life cycle of what they do. So it goes well beyond CI/CD. It goes well beyond deployment and deployment packaging. Right? Those are things that we can help you with up and down and left and right. But if you really look at what you need to worry about, it goes well beyond that. So the production team is really looking at path to production. The role of a path to production team is to build a superior path to production, the platform team is to build a superior path to production and operate it as a service for developers. That's what every single production product, every single platform team that I know of is being asked to do ultimately. You get to the point where you deliver the technology so efficiently, you create a developer CI/CD experience and a deployment experience that's so fast, that's awesome. You'll have business people come up to you and go, that's great, except it still takes me 2 months or 3 months or whatever to get through the compliance regime. So I can deploy every day if I want to, but I still have to wait 3 months anyway. Until that problem gets fixed, none of this matters. So what I think is really hard for platform teams that are engineering oriented is to understand that you've got to have some other skills on staff. I don't care if it's the engineers that do it or if you hire a TPM or if it's your management that's good at this, but you need some more skills. You need to understand how to build the full product life cycle as a path to production, to look at every aspect from idea and funding, which we'll talk a lot more in depth about this, all the way through to end of life. You've got to build tools and capabilities that do things that, in fact, if you were lucky enough to be at Dave and Steve's presentation just before this one on security stuff, and that presentation will be available online for you guys to check it out. There's a tremendous amount of technology available for you to be able to do automation and verification. But if you're not working with your auditors, and you're not working with the people responsible for compliance and regulation in your organization, none of it matters. The technology doesn't matter if you don't have an agreement and a working relationship with those people. And there's other services that you can deliver. And what I like to say is, look, if you want to be a successful platform team in your organization, what you really need to be thinking is, how can we build the best developer experience that they're going to get above and beyond what they'll get from the public cloud providers, above and beyond what they're going to get from any of the low-code tools or anything else that they might be looking at. What can I do to make sure that the development experience that I'm delivering for them is the best development experience that they can get being in our organization, understanding the roadblocks that they're going to hit using any technology in our organization. So let's drill into this a little bit more about things you can do as an organization that, as a platform organization, that can help you do that better. So the first recommendation I have off the beginning of the thing is to value stream map your entire path to production. And this is a book that we've recommended for years and years and years on one way of doing value stream mapping, but I think it's incredibly powerful. Basically, the map that you're going to get is going to look something like, it's very hard to read, and I apologize for for a little bit of the eye chart here. But basically what you're getting there is three kind of critical pieces of information. You're looking at how information flows in your processes. What are the artifacts that are passed from process point to continue the journey? What information is critical to be tracked? Is there a standards document? Like if you're doing SOC 1 or SOC 2, is there a documentation from that gets passed forward to the auditors? You're looking at the workflow itself, the processes, and what you're measuring in those is not just who does what, but how long does an average item sit at that process step before it moves on to the next one, right? So what is the total process time? And what's the actual work time? What's the actual time spent working on it, right? So something may sit there in somebody's queue waiting to be worked on for a number of days before it takes them 3 hours to complete the task that's being asked of them. And you want to look at all of this, and in this, and you want to ask yourself a question. You want to apply something called the theory of constraints. And I believe that probably everybody in here, or at least 95% of you, have heard of the theory of constraints. But this is why I find this the most incredibly important thing that a platform team should be looking at, is you need to look at what are the things that are slowing developers from getting product to production. And you need to systematically eliminate the things that have the most negative effect in that process and turn those into the thing that is not the number one. Make something else the number one slowest thing in the environment, and systematically speed up your environment by eliminating the things that slow it down. And that may not be technology. You could have the fastest, most beautiful CI/CD build process flows. You could be using Cloud Foundry in a highly optimized environment. You could have really good logging and observability and all of those things. And it may turn out that that's not the constraint that your developers face. Your developers face a problem getting, we have organizations where developers can't even get started coding on the next release until they've submitted documentation about what that release is going to be, in an agile environment. My favorite thing is one organization that we talked to where they had a 7-page document that you had to fill out, where you had to explain your architecture, your proposed architecture, and explain your proposed number of customers you're going to be dealing with and loads that you're going to support, what hardware you might want to get in order to be able to be approved for the modernization program that would teach you how to do agile programming, right? I mean, that's the stuff that a platform team has to look at and say, there's a problem here, and that's going to stop us from being successful. And so in this particular case, it's hard to read, but there's one particular process in the middle here that takes 120, 5 days. So things sit there for 5 days, way more than, an order of magnitude more than anywhere else. And it takes about 2 hours for that thing to complete. So what can we do to look at that process step to improve it? And I've sort of talked about this already, but I'm willing to bet that if you've never done a volume stream map for your path to production, if you do one, you're going to find out that the constraint is not in the technology that you run. Automate and Verify is really about understanding the separation of concerns in the things that slow you down. And so let's just assume that it's a compliance or security process that is the thing that actually slows you down. So this is an example that I'm giving you, which is AWS's, I always forget the name of it, but their shared responsibility model. Thank you so much. So if you think in terms of this, in terms of having a shared responsibility model and understanding your piece of it, and again, Stephen David's presentation goes into depth on this. Understanding what are the artifacts that you have to generate in order to satisfy auditors for the applications that are being delivered, not just for the delivery of the platform, but for each application that runs on the platform. What are the things that you can do that can sort of clear the slate for app devs in terms of infrastructure controls, in terms of auditing controls, in terms of a number of other things? And so you have these, in-depth requirements of things that you have to do for all these different requirements. And as was frequently mentioned in the security presentation that I will back up, build packs are absolutely your friend here in a huge way. And I've heard the term stacks being used in place of stem cells in various places. That's really good, because I think when you see us come together with VMware, and I don't mean this as a pitch, I mean this as a technical reality, I think when you look at what Bitnami has been able to do in the past in terms of building secure, repeatable, understandable building blocks, and you look at what we'll bring to the table with the build back capability, I think we're going to be able to put together something where your building blocks that you get are related to, are verifiable. And we've done a lot of the work. And when CVEs come out, we do the work to update those common building blocks that are in the environment. The other thing is, and as I said before, partner with security and compliance teams with the goal of reducing toil and burden for developers. That's the simplest way I can put it, is just reach out to them. I mean, you have to deal with them, I'm sure, all the time, but just sort of say, look, let's set a common goal for the next 6 months to find 5 things we can do that reduce toil for developers with relation to what we have to deal with in common. And I think the last is the P2P services. I think the number one service a platform team can offer for developers, besides including the path to production stuff, I think is to be an advocate for the developers with the rest of the organization. Understanding that you control the dependency model for a number of other things, for infrastructure and infrastructure capacity delivery, for security of all the components that are below the application itself that are not application code, for network, a number, and load balancing, a number of other things. You have that responsibility for representing that for the developers. So you have a responsibility to advocate for the developers in terms of the way those things are run at your organization. And I also think there's an awful lot of practice out there that you can adopt. And this is my one little pitch slide, and this will kind of wrap up the presentation portion, which is we can help. We have a ton of experience at this. We have a ton of different practices and ceremonies and workshops and other things that we can bring to the table. If you're a little bit nervous about how the heck do we eliminate this barrier for our developers, bring us in. And we're absolutely, I'd be very surprised if you brought us into a situation where we didn't have at least some level of experience that applied that would make your life easier. And with that, let me ask, are there any questions? There's a microphone over here if people want to ask questions. This is being filmed, so feel free to go up to the microphone if you've got questions. Wow, I am always so good that I never get any questions. All right, well, thank you very much. I'll let you guys get to dinner. Oh, we do have a question. We do have one question. Somebody who waited patiently.
How have you seen platform teams impact the lead time or delays in the sort of value funding part of that timeline?
Yeah, I think I can't say that there's a magic switch that is there, but I think it relates a lot to the automation that's brought to the table and the agreements that are made with organizations that are nervous about what might fall through the crack if they have automation, right? So I think a lot of the lead time stuff that I see is, first of all, if you can eliminate queues, oh my God, is that alone, even if it takes the same length of time for them to actually do the audit or whatever it is, just finding a way to eliminate the queue so that they can just pick up the next thing and be much more efficient in the way that they deliver those audits, that would be beautiful if you could do that. But I think the level of automation that's really good is if you can produce the same product for the majority of the stack, 99% of the time, right? And you can get verification on that stack once and get an agreement that says if you can measure that there are no changes to those elements from that point forward, or that the changes that are made within known and prescribed ways of like CVEs and things like that. I think if you get those things kind of agreed upon, then that is the number one way to kind of eliminate a lot of those things. If there's an external organization involved. If it's your organization that has, by the way, you could find a constraint in the way you do things. That's absolutely possible. In which case, now you have to work with the development teams and with infrastructure teams or wherever that constraint is coming from. And you may have to fix something you do. You may have to write some code. You may have to eliminate a process step or a ceremony of some sort that's in your process that's actually turning out to slow things down rather than helping. Any other questions? Did I answer your question? We can talk more later. All right, thank you, everybody. Have a great night, and we'll see you all.